What's up, everybody? I missed y'all last week. It's my bad. My bad. Um, while I wait for a few folks to come on in and try and get this to pop up over here on the Black Agendas page because I want to make sure I drop this in there. I just want to make sure that I get started on a few of the things we have going on. Peace, sis. What's going on? So, what's up, y'all? So, I haven't been here in a week. And I certainly don't mean to do that. There's so much going on, mainly with the Black Agenda. It's been really dope. There's been a lot of like amazing connections and things like that happening. And so last week was just so hectic. And every time I got ready to sit down, I was like, no, it's too late. And especially because, my girl, Michi, she goes on around 8 p.m. Eastern, and I don't want to run into her timing, So I missed a week, so my apologies, but I'm back. And so I wanted to jump right in. Let me throw out all my plugs as y'all are coming on in. Definitely the Black Agenda Tour, y'all, it's going down. So we're in Denver this week. Then we head over to Chicago. Then we head over to Atlanta. So if you're in those cities, for sure, go and get your tickets. We actually head over to Brooklyn after that. So if you are in those cities, make sure that you go over to the BlackAgendaOnTour.com. My moderators are dope. They've already dropped the link in there. And then while you're at it, make sure that you text Black Agenda to 484848 so that you can keep up. And so thank you, sis. I appreciate that. Look, it has been just a wild ride, right? And so if you guys don't know, the Black Business Initiative, every year I host a vision board party. This year, this December will be my 5th vision board party that I've hosted. And these are not like a little small get together. Hey girls, let's have a vision board party. Like these are big vision board parties. And so last year we had about 150 people in the vision board party. And it's a vision board party and a resource fair all at the same time, because your visions don't mean anything if you don't work towards them. It's really important that when you have something that you've been purpose with, or something that you want to do, a goal, a dream, a vision, that you actually put in the time and the work for it. And so oftentimes people look at these vision boards, and I talk about this all the time, like, don't create something and then just stick it off to the side, but put it in a space, in a place where you are actively paying attention to it, looking at it daily. And so the space where I meditate every day, the space where I write in my gratitude journal every day, the space where I send my prayers and my petitions to God and to the universe and to my ancestors, and just to all the powers that be that are bigger and larger than me, that help aid me in my walk and in my journey in life. I have my vision board sitting right there. So it is something that I am looking at every day. And on those days when I'm lacking motivation, it's there to remind me what I'm working for. And on those days when things are a little bit tough, it's there to help remind me, right? And so hey y'all, what's good? I'm glad to be back. But I say all that to say that and as things solidify, I guess I will put more information out there. But the last several weeks have just been a whirlwind of things on my vision board really coming to fruition, or at the very minimum, those doors being open to where now these things are not just something that I am imagining and saying, hey, I would love to, have this happen, but like, doors are opening. I'm getting phone calls. I'm getting messages of people saying, hey, I want to connect you here. Or, hey, I want to, put you in line with, with this situation that I think is going to work for you. And there are these collaborations being made. And when you're sitting in front of your visions and seeing them unfold before you, it is just, a very amazing thing, right? And it's like your thoughts and your feelings really have to be in alignment. And that's why that meditation piece is so important. And I feel like it's often an overlooked thing when we talk about meditation. And then we also talk about mindfulness, because what's happening is that, and this is not the topic, this is just like the coach in me coming out right now. So we're just going to talk about it as y'all are coming in. but there has to be an alignment with what you're thinking and what you're feeling. So that you can actually move your goal forward. And the meditation is where you are spending some time, visualizing and being thoughtful on what it is that you want to have happen in your life. But that mindfulness piece is like a present piece. This is like what's happening right now in the present. And so when you find that whether your thoughts are not aligning with your feelings or your feelings are not aligning with your thoughts, that practice of mindfulness comes into play so that you can actually be very conscious about shifting and pivoting wherever you are. So if you are like feeling in your heart of hearts like this thing is for you and somebody planted a seed, like, I don't know if you should do that, right? Then all of a sudden your thoughts start, being misaligned with your feelings. Your mindfulness is going to tell you, wait a second, my mind is going down the wrong path. Let me shift and bring it back to where I know my feelings are. And it's the same thing. Your mind could be telling you that something is getting ready to happen, but inside you're feeling anxious. And anxiety is a big issue that we need to address in our communities, but that's another talk for another day. But you might start feeling anxious. You might start having doubts. You might start having all of those things that you then have to, again, mindfulness, the immediate presence, being in the present, being in the present will tell you that it's, you have to control how you're feeling right now and get it back in alignment with your thought process. So, I just suffice all that to say that, there's been some dope things happening, and I certainly don't mean to be inconsistent. I'm not even at the time that I normally come on, but there's been so many things unfolding, and I'll be very excited to share those things with you guys as they solidify. So anyway, all right. So y'all follow me on Patreon. So you can follow me on Patreon. That's at Grind with Jice. I do have one coaching slot left open. That's it. So that'll be it probably until I estimate until the fall. So if you're interested in coaching with me, you can go there as well. And take a look at that. So, but definitely hit up Patreon. I have a private Facebook group. There's a couple different levels to Patreon, and depending on what, how you want to interact with me. But if coaching is not an option for you, or that's something that you're not able to afford at the moment, or that's something that you're not quite sure if you're ready to dive deep into, then you can get with me on a lower level and, rock with me, ask me questions. That's what the Facebook group is there for, so that we can interact and I respond and all of those things. So that's there. Don't forget, you can also go and follow me at Jice Johnson on Instagram and Facebook, and at BBI Professional. So that's that. All right. Oh, one more thing, y'all, real quick. So I'm going to drop in, I'm about to put up all these little black fists. So go over to the BlackAgenda social media page, because that media page is getting ready to launch out. So I think that happened. Maybe it happened. I just tried to comment as the BlackAgenda. Maybe it happened. Maybe it didn't happen. I don't know. I'll try it again because I don't see it. There we go. All right. So I just dropped it in there, the BlackAgenda. If you go over to the BlackAgenda, you guys want to make sure that you subscribe there as well, because there is going to be other folks on that page. All right. So I just dropped it in there twice so that it's real clear where the BlackAgenda is, but you want to go and follow that page. All right. And then here's my last little soft promo. So I have not launched this page yet, y'all, but I'm getting ready to launch a Jice Johnson page. It'll be separate from here because this is the Black Business Initiative. The Black Business Initiative is here to talk about all things in the Black community: mindset, money, economic development, how to get your business going, and around what's going on in our communities and how the things that are happening on our day-to-day lives are affecting us, right? So that's the Black Business Initiative. I personally get a lot of questions being asked about motherhood, motherhood, and then like mompreneurship, people wanting to do business with their children, homeschooling, and other things like that. So that is going to be a page. It's not launched yet. So this is just kind of a soft promo for those of you that are interested in finding out about or learning a little bit more about like how I operate on a regular basis, or how you can operate. Really, it's not really about me, but it's about, just me sharing with you how I do a lot of the things that I do, how I have my multiple businesses, how I homeschool my kids, and the way that I work as a mompreneur and homeschooling and things like that. So just know that's coming very soon, mainly out of requests. And I want to be able to separate that from the Black Business Initiative and separate that from what our mission and our goal is here and what I do as a person. All right, so thank y'all for joining me. I want to make sure that I also thank our folks who have been donating. Y'all, you guys have been definitely donating, and I appreciate that, to the Black Agenda, and making sure that we are, that we have some of the resources that we need to keep this tour going. So definitely peace and prosperity and blessings to all of you who have done that. So y'all, let's talk about this American Cold War. That is what we are talking about today. American Cold War. And really what I mean by that. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Cold War. We kind of hear about it a little bit in history lessons. Like we hear about the Cold War between like the US and the Soviet Union or whatever. And basically when we look at a Cold War, it was like we weren't actually at war, but there was a lot of hostility that was there, right? And so ultimately it was like dubbed the Cold War, and I think that's what people often think about, but we need to acknowledge what a Cold War is, and the fact that the Black community is essentially like inside of a Cold War in America, and it's been that way. I would say it's probably turned more to a Cold War status, more along the lines of shortly after the Civil Rights Movement. And so during Jim Crow, so let me explain what a Cold War is, just in case you don't know. So a Cold War is basically political hostility towards a group or a country, right? But we can look at ourselves as a country in a country, essentially, right? We are a nation. We are a socioeconomic group inside of a nation, right? And so it is a political hostility that is usually met with things like a hostile environment. It's met with threats. It's met with propaganda. That's like huge, right? Propaganda. And it's basically short of like all out warfare. And so since the Civil War, there really hasn't been an actual war fought on American land, right? When we think about the other wars, the world wars were fought on other people's land, right? The war in Iraq and Afghanistan, those are fought on their land. So like when you go there are buildings that have been bombed and torn down homes, and you find churches and mosques filled with dead people or filled with uh, bodies. They've turned some of these places into makeshift hospitals, right? There's a lot of things that happen when you're looking at actual war happening on your soil, meaning bombs, tanks, all out open warfare, right? And so Hollywood kind of shows us a propagandized version, again, just like this Hollywood version of what that looks like. But even if you can picture that Hollywood version, that's not what's happening here in our streets on a day-to-day basis. So I don't want to have the argument about, or I don't even want to have the discussion about, what warfare looks like in our communities. I'm not saying that there's not like very openly hostile situations that happen in our communities. But what I would say is that if you've ever had the opportunity to travel to a country that has war taking place on their soil, it's a different situation than what we have here. And yeah, so there's that, right? So when I say short of like open warfare, what I mean is that we don't have that actual wartime situation happening on American soil. So that being said, that means that a Cold War is very political, is very hostile. It's around propaganda and other methodology to basically fight with each other, right? So y'all just understand that. All right. So now, how are we at a Cold War with America, essentially, right? So let's start talking about, first of all, I always want to talk about the propaganda piece. I think that is such a huge piece. And some of what I love, so Dedication 666 said, Cold War is opposite of a hot war, meaning bullets flying past your head. Cold War equals intersectionality propaganda. Exactly. So thank you for clarifying that for anybody who didn't get that. Yeah, like we don't have bullets flying past our head on a regular, but not on a daily basis, right? I spent a year in Iraq. we were bombed like literally every single day, like sirens going off, get into a bunker, RPG bombs, right? So we don't have that here. So thank you. But that's what I'm talking about. That's not what's happening here. Even if you live in a hostile environment, even if you live in, let's say, a bad neighborhood in Detroit, a bad neighborhood in Oakland, a bad neighborhood in Chicago, like that's not what's happening here. So that's what I'm getting at. All right. So propaganda is a big piece of this. And I think we need to understand like where a lot of the propaganda with Black folks really shifted and changed. And I've talked about this before. So when we got out of slavery, during slavery, right? Black people were looked at, first of all of our attributes were highlighted, especially when you were on the auctioning block, right? So you were big, you were strong, you could clean well, you were smart enough to figure out how to invent some stuff, like you could make some things happen, right? When you were on the auctioning block, right? So there were ways that we were promoted and highlighted as being useful, a useful tool, a useful benefit to whoever was getting ready to buy us, right? Then once slavery was over and we were freed, that's when it became like we're vicious, we're angry, we're monsters. We brutalize white women, hide your white woman, she's in danger now, right? And so the idea began to change around, what we were and what we were capable of. Now we weren't great workers, now we're lazy, right? So propaganda is this idea that the media, that information that gets put out there, that publications, and this is why it's important that you read, but also where you vet your sources for reading, and that you read multiple different things and see what some stuff are saying, what things are saying, right? Because you have like publications, like real scientific publications that are put out that talk about, how we were, we experienced less pain, and how we're, we're subhuman, right? Like these are things that are written in books. So just reading books is not in and of itself like the answer. It's making sure that what you're reading is credible. And if you read something that's not credible or you question it, like do additional research, because people should be gathering their research from some place when they write it in a book, from studies or experiences or wherever, right? So don't just take something that's in a book as fact. That's what a lot of folks in white America are doing when they are over here trying to use a lot of these excuses. Is they will take, an opinion article, like an op-ed. An op-ed is not fact. An op-ed is opinion. That's why it says op-ed. It's an opinion piece, right? And then there are like articles that are supposed to be based off of facts and studies and numbers and statistics and data and whatever. So it's important as to like where we get our information from, right? So that being said, we have to be very careful around what propaganda looks like, because propaganda can be pushed out there like it's fact. It can be pushed out there like it is the truth. And also propaganda is something that is a continuous message over and over and over again, so that it penetrates your mind and it begins to make you think of that thing. And we have to recognize as Black people that we are under the same type of propaganda that white people get. So if on the news stations, they're running continuous messages over and over and over again that are disproportionately showing Black people as criminals, white people see that and believe we're criminals. Black people also see that and believe that we're criminals, right? And then that's where we get this dissociation. I don't want to be associated with them. They're criminals, right? So I want to show people that I am part of the good Black people, right? Like I'm not like them. And that's where we start to have these delineations and these separations in our identity, because now you have to look yourself in the face every day, but you have to try and tell yourself that you're not like those Black people that they're showing the rest of the world. So then you start going out into the world under all these microaggressions, and you're stressing yourself out and going out of your way, trying to prove and show that you're not like this stereotypical imagery that is being promoted and pushed across thousands of radio stations and news channels and social media and newspapers on a regular basis, right? That's a stressor in general for you to try and live in your Black body and yet dissociate yourself from the imagery of what it means to be Black in America. And so that's why I love these campaigns. Like, as much as, no, we're not all descendants of king and queens. We're not all We're not all goddesses and gods. Like, I mean, we can talk about God being in us. We can talk about the power that lives within us, right? But the reality is like, I love these Black Girl Magic campaigns because of the way that oh, my bad, y'all. That's somebody trying to call me on Facebook. Okay. My bad. But I love the way, I don't know if y'all could hear that, but somebody was calling me on Facebook. But I love those type of campaigns because it's beginning to shift the narrative of what it means to be Black, right? That is so important. Like, we literally have to keep pushing this message. I call people who I literally don't like, I'd be like, all right, sis, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm going to continue to push to you that you're my sister and we still have to be united on things that count. I ain't gotta like you, but you still my sis, you still my brother. Like, it's all good, right? And so we have to kind of push some of that messaging and push some of those that imagery. We have to push it a lot, because for a very long time, these messages have been pushed on us that we're brutal, that we're dangerous, that we're violent, right? And the reality is that ever since we've been here, really since before we got here, since the interior of Africa, violence has been inflicted on us. We have not been the perpetrators or the originators of that violence, and yet we are positioned in media and positioned in these other places like we are the violent ones. Like, you should be scared of us. And the reality is that the more that you find out about our history, maybe they should be scared of us, right? Like, I stay in my house a lot. I run some errands, I do it, but I work from home. If you want to have a meeting with me, we finna have a Zoom meeting, right? I school my children at home. I go out as infrequently as possible. Sometimes I have my groceries delivered, because the more that you know about us, the deeper that you dig into how fucking great we were and how they have really reduced us down to something that is still beautiful and something that is still great, but you have to dig through a lot of the trash to get to the greatness, right? It's like the diamond in the rough kind of a thing. And that is such an angering, triggering situation. Oftentimes they're like, yeah, if I was white people, I would be worried about us knowing how great we were too. And the fact that we've been so great despite all of these attacks that have been on us is really a testament to how absolutely great we really were, right? So anyway, let me pull this back. So propaganda, I think, is very important because there are some specific pieces of propaganda that really get pushed on us. One is like Black on Black crime, which really irritates the shit out of me. And there are certain things that you'll find, like, I will say something and then I'm gonna let you know, like, going forward, I don't say them things no more, right? So I don't say white supremacy because white people are not supreme. Matter of fact, in a lot of ways, they're inferior. But I will say violent white racists. So when I'm saying violent white racists, that is AKA white supremacists for those of us who just don't get it and we need to have some sort of other, messaging, right? So violent white racists. Okay, so Black on Black crime is another one of those things. Black on Black crime is, there's no such thing as Black on Black crime, people. There's crime, okay? Crime. Why? Because crime is often a thing of proximity. And so what you don't often see are Black people traveling to some other location to inflict crime on other Black people. They inflict crime on the people who they live around. They inflict crime on two different sets that are next to each other, neighborhoods that are next to each other, gangs that are next to each other. It's all about proximity. And that crime exists in white communities, Asian communities, Hispanic communities, Jewish communities. There's no communities in which crime does not exist within proximity. And so the levels and statistics of crime, whatever, we can get into that. Are there places where the crime needs to be lowered? Absolutely. But the idea that Black on Black crime is a thing is false. That's propaganda. The statistics hold fairly stable in all communities, right? So the majority of people inflicting crime on white people are other white people. The majority of crimes being inflicted on Black people are other Black people, but we don't call it white on white crime because it's just crime. And again, not that it doesn't need to be addressed, but it's just crime. And so when people try and use this idea that the government does not need to focus in on Black people until Black people focus in on Black people, that's bullshit. There are peace rallies, there are churches, there is gang prevention, there's all these organizations that have come up oftentimes underfunded. The ones who get the funding are white-owned organizations to come in and solve Black problems that white people caused. That's a problem. That's a whole cyclical situation. We're going to inflict a problem on you, then we're going to give you the answer to your problem, and we're going to get funded to come and give you the answer to your problem. That's bullshit, right? But the Black-owned organizations that are inside of the Black community that are addressing a lot of the needs of the community are oftentimes underfunded, right? So, so this idea that the Black community doesn't address crime in our areas is false. And so what should happen is we should have more funding going to those organizations who are addressing that, but nevertheless, it's false, right? And then when we think about, you know, what these crime rates look like I said, they hold fairly steady. So you can go in, and whether or not you believe fully FBI statistics or you don't believe FBI statistics, the statistics don't even support the narrative that's put out there. So I have sometimes people who are like, I get weird comments sometimes, but I have people who are like, oh, I don't believe the FBI statistics anyway. Okay, well, don't believe them. Like, you don't believe them for the good or for the bad, because quite frankly, the FBI statistics support the fact that Black on Black crime doesn't exist. It's just crime. That's what the FBI statistics support. So that is a propaganda piece that continuously gets pushed out there. And it's one thing for it to get pushed out by violent white racists. It's another thing when the Black community pushes out there that there's Black on Black crime, right? So not only do we have to go in and like fix what they're pushing, but we also have to police our own people, because, and I'm not even about to get into HR 40 because now it's like that situation is like a week old, and because I didn't get on last week, I didn't get to address it. But HR 40, that hearing was a prime example of like bullshit and fuckery. But you know, when we have our own people who use this type of language, that is where I think a lot of the harm is created, because we look at Black people. We look at white people for validation. White people look at cooning ass Black people to validate the fact that they're correct, and then they continue to push that same messaging, right? So they'll go and they'll get like a Ben Carson, or let me not even start naming names because that's how YouTube gets messy. They use Black coons to go in and, you know, vouch for their messaging, right? They get them to agree to their messaging and then point to that Black person and be like, see, your own people say it, right? So I feel like that narrative is very harmful in our communities. So CC Ryder says, are you saying there's no Black on Black crime? Yes, that's what I'm saying. There's no Black on Black crime. There's just crime. There's just crime. Crime is done predominantly in proximity. Violent crime. Let me take that back. Violent crime is done in proximity. So when you're talking about getting robbed, assaulted, raped, murdered, those violent crimes are done in proximity. White collar crimes are done obviously on a bigger scale, and then there's drug trafficking, sex cartels and things like that. But violent crime, when they're talking about violent crime, Black on Black crime, is presented around, you know, places like Detroit and Chicago and Oakland and Baltimore, where they're pushing out these ideas and these notions that crime in the Black community is some sort of epidemic at some sort of epidemic level. And that's absolutely false. Their own studies and statistics support that that's false. Black people are the largest, well, let's use murder, for example. Black people commit the most murder on other Black people. White people commit the most murder on other white people. Black people are not a danger, by and large, statistically, to white people. They're a danger to Black people. That doesn't hold true for white people, but Asian people are, by and large, like a danger to other Asian people. Hispanic people are a danger to other Hispanic people because it's proximity. So Black on Black crime doesn't exist. Crime exists within proximity. So if you have a Black neighborhood and you pull a ton of Black people together, then you're going to have crime largely being done by Black people inflicting it on other Black people, but it's just crime. So the same thing is going to happen if you go into a white neighborhood and you have all white people. The crime that's being committed against those other white people are by white people, but it's not called white on white crime. It's just called crime. So what I'm saying is we have to stop making it seem like Black people have some other level of crime that doesn't exist. That's propaganda. This is a part of the Cold War. This is not all out warfare. This is a part of a Cold War tactic in order to take off the pressure for what the government needs to be doing to create equity inside of our communities. They point the finger back on us and say, well, you have a Black on Black crime issue, when really it's just an issue of crime. And we can get into how that happens, but that's a bigger conversation. Like if you want to just address the crime in our communities, that's like a whole, conversation in of itself. But yes, there's no Black and Black crime. So then Limelight said, why does Black crime get reported more often? So again, propaganda. Like I'm literally telling you the answer. It is propaganda. Can somebody look up the definition? Like I can tell you what propaganda is, but like, can somebody drop in the official like Webster dictionary description of what propaganda is? Like we're talking about messaging that gets pushed on the community. So the idea that the news media, the government, the news media, the media, the news, the government, movies, commercials, video games, all these things that push out a consistent visual and auditory message, that is why they show us in that light. The whole purpose is for everyone to believe that Black people are violent. So then they show and highlight Black crimes in a very disproportionate way online. That is what it is. It's very disproportionate online. So thank you for all of those, right? So propaganda, information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. So that is why it is highlighted like that. Black crimes are highlighted more on media because they are presenting Black people as being violent and being someone who you should be afraid of, right? Because then when there's a police brutality case, when there is a police shooting, it was, oh, I fear for my life. Well, why did you fear for your life? Well, because Black people are violent. Why do you think Black people are violent? Because all of the messaging that you show on your fucking news channel says we're violent, even though you're showing us in a disproportionate manner. So I hope that makes sense. All right. So yes, there's a whole lot of propaganda definitions in there. So if you don't know what propaganda is, get familiar with it, because it is a Cold War tactic. This is what's happening. Every day you're being fed negative, false messaging about what it means to be Black. That Black people have to struggle with what it means to be Black, right? So that's propaganda. Another one is the fact that we're lazy. So 400 years of free labor literally being worked to the death of us, and now all of a sudden we're lazy. We are lazy, y'all. Did y'all know we was lazy? Yeah, it's hard to even have a comeback for laziness, especially because in this propaganda. So I started off by talking about when this Cold War kind of started, right? And it's like the Cold War, in my opinion, the Cold War kind of started after the end of civil rights, right? Because after marching, getting beaten, getting, water hosed and attacked by dogs, working tirelessly for years and years and years to change policy and legislation, after building communities with no structure or support, after working and fighting to get free, after fighting in all of these wars, after building this country for no wages, like after all those things, I would say Black folks on a stereotypical level have been lulled to sleep. So that it appears, again, through propaganda, that we're lazy. But the reality of it is that we're still fighting policy and legislation. The reality of it is many of us are working 2 and 3 jobs. The reality of it is we're going to school to higher education at the same rate as white people are. The reality of it is that we've been consistently fighting in some sense, shape, or form for equality since we've ever stepped foot here, in this country, right? And so the idea or the notion that Black people are lazy is just simply not true. Now, can you find a lazy person? Absolutely. And you're going to find them everywhere, right? So there's no culture that exists with people who are not lazy. Now, there's a value system that I think in our communities need to be upheld that used to be very strong, right? We've all heard the saying, I'm almost positive, we've all heard the saying that we have to work twice as hard to get half as much. We have to be twice as good to get half as much, right? So the idea that we have had to always be excellent has been pushed on us for forever. And we know that if you've made it anywhere in your career, in your workplace, in your schooling, that you have had to work incredibly hard, much harder than the white mediocre people who have been next to you have had to work in order for you to get that recognition of how dope you are, right? So there are lazy people everywhere, and that does not exclude us, but by and large, as a whole, that's not who we are. And so we have to make sure that we push off the idea or the notion that we're lazy. And so when we try to equate um, productiveness with laziness, I'm trying to think of how I'm trying to frame this here. I think we can get really off track, right? Because some of the ways that our laziness is produced is highlighted is in what we're able to produce. So, for example, we might say, well, we're not excelling in our careers. Well, there is systemic racism inside of private and government hiring practices. So is the fact that we're not at the top level of management, is that an indication of laziness, or is that systemic, right? You might say something around, well, we don't have a lot of home ownership. Is that systemic, or is that laziness? Like, we can't attribute what we have accomplished in this society to whether or not we are lazy, because there are systemic issues and factors that have to come into play there. It's not that we're not working for these things, it's that there are systems that are making sure we don't have them. And so what happens is, there's this idea of you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That's a lazy argument. That's the idea that Black people are not where they should be because Black people don't put in the work to get where they should be. That is the backdoor channel of saying you're lazy. Any pull yourself up by your bootstraps argument that you hear is a backdoor way of somebody saying Black folks are lazy. That's what that is. So now when you hear it, you could be like, cut that shit. These are systemic issues. These are systemic issues. Are not doing as well economically, politically, financially, in the education field. All these gaps that exist are systemic gaps, every single last one of them. Not one of these gaps that exist is due to our exertion of effort. So the idea that we're lazy is absolutely ludicrous. It just is. And when you hear that, like, that needs to be cut immediately. We're far from lazy. We've never had the opportunity to be lazy. Never have had the opportunity to be lazy if we wanted to. But this is propaganda, right? The idea that we're uneducated and that we don't want to learn. Black people say Black people don't want to learn. I just can't even understand how people have literally died for the right to read. Just to read, just to understand. It's not like we came from a place where we didn't have a language and we didn't have a way for us to communicate. This is, we got here, and that ability for us to be able to understand what is being written down, what is in a book, was actually removed from us. It was illegal. It was made into law that we could not read. If you were caught teaching us to read, you could be killed. If you were caught knowing that you knew how to read, you could be killed, right? So then when we did get the legal right to be able to read, let me put this in a context. So education at one point was a class thing, especially in a lot of European and Western societies. Everyone did, like the idea of public education in the big scheme of history is fairly new. Everyone did not get to be educated. You got to learn a trade, you got to learn how to help out at home, right? But education as a whole was not something that was afforded to everyone. So when Black folks were legally awarded the right to read, there were other illiterate populations that existed inside of America. Okay. So the Irish were by and large illiterate. A lot of Jews were illiterate. Poor white people were illiterate. A lot of people were illiterate. It was not illegal for them to read, but a lot of people were illiterate. So now, when we had the ability to go in and learn how to read, do you know that we were the fastest growing population of literacy, or we gained our literacy as the fastest population? Somewhere in this propaganda messaging, it's been said that we are lazy and we don't value education, but that has never been true in our communities ever. So once literacy was pushed on people, like Black folks became the most literate the fastest, if that makes sense. I don't know how to frame that, but we became literate quickly, faster than the other socioeconomic groups that were also illiterate. So there's that. So now what happens in our schools is that we have, by and large, not 100%. I've said this before. I am a linguistic learner, okay? That's who I am. You can sit me in front of a book. You can sit me in front of a lecture. I eat that shit up, right? Not that I don't learn visually. I learn that way as well, but I'm definitely a linguistic learner. But by and large, our people are kinesthetic learners. And so the school system was designed to pump out workers for industrial purposes, right? So when we look at why our kids don't thrive in school, our kids are not thriving in school because they don't want to learn. Our kids are thriving in school because they're pacified at home with things like the television, and in a lot of cases, the television and now the internet. But also our family units, because again, our lazy asses have to work 2 and 3 jobs, right? We're not necessarily in a position to foster learning like we used to be able to foster learning. But the other piece of that is that when they are in school for those 6 and 7 hours a day, then we're not being educated. Right? Funding for our schools is very skewed. Even in the poorest white neighborhoods, like it's not just a class issue. Even in the poorest white neighborhoods, those schools get more funding than Black schools or schools in predominantly Black areas get funded. Like the funding for our schools is virtually non-existent. And so we get shitty teachers. I talked about this. If you guys didn't go and see the video that I did with Hasira Ashamu around education, like we've talked about how Teach for America puts these Beckys in our schools. They're these young, unequipped white women who are in our schools. They're there for 1 or 2 years. They're there to get their student loans, removed, and then they move on. And our kids have this high turnover rate. They're there with people who have all this same bad messaging, so they think our kids ain't shit in the first place, right? Like this is who our kids are spending 6, 7, 8 hours a day around. So this is a systemic attack on our ability to be educated about who we are and about the communities that we live in and about how our society actually works. So this is like a literal systemic attack to keep us miseducated and uninformed, dummied down, and asleep. Our entire education system is like that. So when you want to know why the fuck I homeschool, because in good consciousness, I cannot send my children into that. I did that for 4 years. My daughter went to school from kindergarten through 4th grade. By 4th grade, I had enough. I just plain and simply had enough of bullshit. And I don't even think that she got the worst of it. Like my daughter was never involved in any violent situations. My daughter was just involved with people who never really saw her potential and a school system that just didn't believe in her ability to do anything or to thrive. So like I can't have her there because she can't grow up in her most susceptible, formidable years believing that she doesn't have the ability to thrive. She can't have that. So then I pull my kids out and I homeschool. Right. So CC Ryder says that's the job of parents to set rules for their children to turn off the idiot box and those video games. Well, yes, right. So I'm gonna talk about this in more depth when I open up this Jice Johnson channel or whatever, because I think it's important that we recognize like how to find some balance in what's happening. Absolutely, we need to turn off the box, and then what? Like, so first of all, I'm not really playing devil's advocate. Like I'm asking, Lord have mercy. I'm asking a real ass question. We turn off the TV and then what? Most adults can't even turn off the TV. Like a lot of adults come home from work and you sit down, you get a drink, and you sit in front of the TV, right? We're not even feeding our kids healthy meals. We stop off at McDonald's, all of these places, you know what I'm saying? Like looking for what? I don't know. But a lot of times we're coming home, we're tired. We may have another job to go to. You may be Ubering. You may be, I don't know what the hell people are doing these days, right? I mean, I'm in a similar boat, but it's at a different place, right? I work for myself, but I do a lot of things, right? I'm a landlord. I'm working on learning how to develop land. That's a job in and of itself. I literally don't trade foreign exchange the way I want to trade foreign exchange because that's a process to really learn and understand how to read charts. I homeschool my kids. That's a job. I do the Black Business Initiative. That's a job. I'm now on a national tour with the BlackAgenda. That's a job, right? So like we all work multiple jobs. I believe in multiple streams of income. And so a lot of what I'm doing is working to create passive streams of income, right? I could hire a property manager and I could remove some of that burden from me being a landlord and creating those passive streams, right? But it's important for us to really figure out how we use our time. So I'm up here. I've been with you guys for 45 minutes. You know where my children are? They're with their tablets. Because that when like you want to know how I do it, I have tablets. Like that's the reality of it. And so like that was something I had to come to grips with, right? Because it's one thing when I had one kid. When I had one kid, I could teach her to like sit here and be quiet. My 3 kids are not going to do that. They're just not at this age, right? And so obviously there's different levels to it, but that's a very serious question. You turn off the cable, you turn off the idiot box, right? Whatever you want to call it, and then what? And I ask you that because I'm not saying that there's not an answer, but I ask you that because it's important that we think through how we do these things and not just throw out like a nuanced version. Absolutely. Absolutely. They have educational apps, right? So they're learning colors, numbers, shapes. They're learning, you know, processes and patterns and all these great things. That is what they're doing. But if we automatically think that, for example, if we automatically think that electronics are bad, then I think we're missing the mark, right? I just think we're missing the mark. I think that we're not thinking through the possibilities and the options, right, of what could be out there. So anyway, I just, I just pretty much asked that question because I think it's very important. As if you think of one solution for something, we have to have like what comes next after that. How do you replace it? Replace the TV with what? Because it's not just taking away something, it has to be replacing something. You don't just take away fast food, you replace it with healthy food that feeds your system and feeds your cells, right, and feeds your brain. So we can't just remove, right? And that's everything. When we talk about issues, we can't just think about removing, we have to think about replacing. When we talk about removing, like, fuck the police, right? So now what do we use in place of the policing system? Because ideally the policing system serves a purpose, it just doesn't benefit us, and the system is broken. You don't remove the education system, you replace it with something. So we always have to be thinking in terms of replacement. Replace, not just remove, not just get rid of, but replace it with what? And that's the same thing with everything, right? I'm not even about to put on my coaching hat, but just know if we talk about coaching and you have fucked up habits, we're going to talk about how to replace them with successful habits, because you can't just remove something. Our brains literally don't work that way. If you have a habit, you don't just remove the habit. That's why people who want to stop smoking, they have to figure out what's the next thing after they stop smoking. Because out of habit, you're used to doing this, or you're used to taking a break, or you're used to doing something. You now have to replace what you do. That's why they say, well, chew some gum or take a walk or have an apple or do whatever. It's all about replacement. So, I want to push you all of you to think when you have to replace something, I mean, when you have to remove something or you've noticed that something isn't good, think about how you're going to replace it. So, all right, so I want to just get through a couple of these other ones. Like, basically, you know, black on black crime doesn't exist. It's just crime. We're the furthest from lazy. Let's not equate what we've accomplished with what we have exerted. We're definitely not uneducated, but let's also consider that we have a long way to go to get back to re-infusing our youth with the love of learning, because they're put in these positions on a day-to-day basis where they have been stripped of their love of learning. And at the end of the day, when we're looking at why we're facing things like oppression, and why we're oppression, Lord, depression, right? Why depression is on the rise, a lot of mental issues on the rise, because that's boredom. As a people, as a person, you are naturally inclined to want to know more and learn more about something. And when that is denied from you or taken away from you, and also your ability to be productive, meaning you're not working on something or able to excel or able to move up, when those things are removed from you, you're not able to be productive and you're not able to be inquisitive and learn and innovative, then you fall into a lot of mental health issues. And so when we begin to talk about these mental health issues that are inside of our community, we have to recognize that we are being denied access to a lot of the outlets that we naturally need to have in order to be healthy mentally. Okay. Definitely suicide rate is on the rise in the Black community. Because I remember growing up, I was like, that's a white thing. Black folks don't kill themselves. Like, but we do. We do. So then there's this idea around like these false comparisons, right? These are arguments that our people make, false comparisons. The idea that we're going to compare ourselves to, say, like the Jewish Holocaust. We're going to compare ourselves to the Asian community, right? So when we think about other communities, so let's take the brown community for example. So first of all, inside of the transatlantic slave trade, let's acknowledge that Black people were dropped off in Hispanic or Latino countries, right? Culturally, right? So there are Black Dominicans, Black Brazilians, Black Chileans, Black Argentinians, Black Mexicans. Like, we were dropped off in all those places, but culturally we're different. So when we look at from a cultural perspective, like, we have to recognize that the whole southern part of the United States used to be Mexico. And then we talk about how the Mexicans shouldn't be here. They were under a certain type of attack, like war took place on their territory and they lost ground and they were pushed back into what we now know as Mexico today. But like Texas, California, Wyoming, not Wyoming, what am I talking about? New Mexico, Utah, like, what else is down there? Arizona, right? Like, I'm thinking of a map. Like, all those places used to be Mexico. So it's crazy to me, like, were they under the same type of attack that we are? No. I don't know. You can't hear me? Let me know if y'all can hear me, because Charles just asked what happened to the sound. I'm assuming then that you can hear me because somebody just said Utah. Okay, cool. So yeah, so like those southern states used to be Mexico, right? So now I'm not going to sit over here and like I'm not about to advocate around whatever their issues are, but just recognize, like, they were under a violent attack and their land was seized. We can look at the same thing with Native Americans, right? So Native Americans, those who we know to be here, and we can talk about when Black folks got here and all of that, but I think we know the overall idea that there were Native American tribes that were here inhabiting this country, right? They were under another type of attack. That was like a genocide. With the Mexicans, it was like, basically a seizure of their land. And then so they killed off the Native Americans, they pushed back the Mexicans, and then they brought over the free labor from Africa, right? Like, that's what's happened here. So there are these different claims. The Asian people and the Jewish people did not have those same situations happen to them. So when we try to look at different socioeconomic groups that are thriving, and we look at the Asian community, and we look at the and we look at the Jewish community from a historical standpoint, for the years that America has been here, those things did not happen to them. They migrated over here to this country for whatever issues were happening over in their country, but they came with a different support system. They came with a different, whatever, right? So there's a lot to that. When we talk about the Holocaust, like the Holocaust was a very short amount of time. The Holocaust was, somebody help me out, 4 or 5 years. I think something like that. Okay. We have 400 years. Like, what are we talking about here? Big difference. So we try to make a lot of these comparisons, like Black people make these comparisons. Look at what the Asians were able to do. Was it 12 years? I feel like I don't know about that number. Somebody fact check that. I don't feel like it was only 12. I mean, that it was 12 years, but maybe. I don't feel like it was a decade, over a decade. The Holocaust was over a decade, was it? Okay, somebody fact check that for me. Oh, well, shit. Okay, well, then there you go. So there you have it. Okay, so they have a decade and we have centuries. Not like 1 century. We only have 1 century of fucking Jim Crow. We have centuries and they had a decade. I don't think we can compare. I don't think that we can make those comparisons, right? So I think it's important that when we hear other Black folks, and I'm just saying, like, we need to check each other in love, but we need to check each other. We don't allow Black folks to undergird the argument for violent white racists that we should be compared to Asians and Jews, right? If anything, if we want to look at the other two very large, communities that are disenfranchised, it would be the Hispanic community and the Native American community. And as I said, they tried to commit genocide on them, push back the land on the other, stole land from the others, basically stole land from both, but stole land from them, killed them, tried to kill them off, and then brought us in here for the free labor to build this country. That does not apply to the Asians. That does not apply to the Jews. And we cannot use them as examples for what it is that we go through in this country. Now they are comparing gay oppression to Black oppression. That part. Okay, so, right. So we have to make sure that we acknowledge what our claim is. Our claim does not mean that other people don't have claims, right? ADOS, and the idea that ADOS is a very specific group of people that have a claim, right? Is not negating that other people don't have claims. It's about where those claims are happening, right? I'm not saying that the Native American community shouldn't figure out what needs to happen to be properly restituted inside their communities, but they were given land. They were given some sort of restitution for what has happened to them. There's treaties and all of that's happened to them, right? Now I think they should fully continue to fight, because as far as I'm concerned, they're in a fucked up situation, but that's their fight. Same thing with the Mexicans, right? We have our own fight, and we cannot allow ourselves to shortcut to short circuit our own fight by using these violent white racist ideologies and excuses, in order to state that we're not deserving of something, or to acknowledge the war that is happening against us. Right. So again, we're at war. These are wartime tactics. These are Cold War time tactics. So making these false comparisons and saying again that we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps because, hey, look at the Asians, look at the Jews. That's saying that we're lazy and that we're the cause of our own detriment, because look at these other people who did not face in any way, shape, or form what we faced. Look at how well they're doing. Doesn't work. So then we have to recognize systems, and I'm gonna try and wrap this up because I got other stuff to do, and Michi X is getting ready to be coming on here soon. So I'm gonna wrap this up. We have to recognize that we're at war through systems, right? So criminal justice, I've talked a lot about false messaging, propaganda is a wartime tactic, but I also want to acknowledge that systems is like the other half of that, right? So there's all the messaging, and then there's all the systems that are in place. And when we look at where we are, we have been attacked systemically with hiring practices. I just had a meeting. So in Colorado, here in Denver, we have a new governor that was elected, and that governor made a big push for the Black vote. And so there was an organization here, CBRT, that called for the governor to be held accountable to his campaign promises. So he organized a meeting, and there were about 60-ish Black leaders that were personally invited to come sit at that meeting with the governor to talk about accountability to the Black community. I was very fortunate. This is one of the things I was in actually last Thursday, so that's why I didn't make my live on Thursday. But this is one of the things that I was personally invited to come and sit at the table and have this conversation to address what the new governor intended to do around these things, right? And so one of the things that he did was he was bringing some of his staff, and they began to have this whole conversation around the things that are happening in higher education. So they were acknowledging that we're, going into college at this high rate, and then they said, well, we're not completing college, we're dropping out. And so I pushed back on that. We have to begin to understand that the education system and the hiring system go hand in hand. The idea is you go to college, you get a degree, then you can get that good job, right? That good job. All right, well, we have to recognize that that is a system that we are still disadvantaged in. So the reality of it is that we go to school, we can get that degree, we're saddled with student loan debt. Please, nobody tell me about the 1 or 2 people who are going to talk about a full ride scholarship. Okay. That's not the idea. And then we're going to go into a hiring system that's biased. Did y'all see that, like, literally recently in 2019, like a couple of weeks ago, in 2019, there was a company that had the audacity to actually put that they preferred a Caucasian in their job description, right? Like, this is what private corporations look like. You hire who you want to hire. They put that inside of their description that they prefer a Caucasian. So you can only imagine what the working environment there looks like, right? But the government is the largest employer of Black people. Government, I mean, the unemployment rate for Black people is double what they're telling you. In some places, there is like a 50% unemployment rate in certain areas. But everything that they tell you on a national level, like, that's not the real unemployment rate. Not for the Black community. That's not the unemployment rate. So you go and get this degree, you saddle yourself with 60, 70, 150, $200,000 worth of debt, especially all of you aspiring doctorates, right? You're saddling yourself with all this debt. And then you're going to go out into the world, a world that is not going to hire you. Black organizations, Black establishments are not quite at the capacity where they can take on full-time workers. That's one. Two, and I'm going to talk about this on one of my podcasts. So if y'all are not subscribed to Boss Up with BBI, subscribe there. But I'm going to talk about this on my podcast with a futurist named Chet Sisk, because the future of where our economy is going is not even into full-time employment. It's into freelancing. But freelancing still takes into account that I'm going to look at you and decide whether or not I want to hire you. And people don't like hiring Black folks. There's been a ton of studies on even just a hand being held out, a white hand versus a Black hand holding the exact same thing. The white hand even charging more money for a lesser quality product will get paid more than the Black hand, right? So, like, we just have to understand that we're pouring ourselves into this system that does not work for us. That's an important thing for us to recognize and for us to realize, right? So, but that's a system. It's a system. So again, we're at war. Like, some people don't like that messaging. And I guess I don't care, because the reality of it is that's what it is. And as long as we're lulled to sleep, like, you feel okay being at war because you don't have literal bullets flying past you. You just don't get that for all the work you put out, where you should be based off of that work if all things were even. But because they're not even, then you just get tired. Like, you just get tired, right? I mean, that's how a lot of us feel. We come home every day and we're tired and we're anxious and we're angry and we're self-medicating with drugs and alcohol and fucked up food. And we're sitting in front of a TV, which is continuing the war on our minds. So we just have to begin to understand that, like, every single day, despite us not living in Afghanistan or living in Iraq, like, we're under attack daily. You go to work and you're under attack. You are inside of systems that are not designed to benefit you, but are actually designed to hurt you and harm you. Then you come home and all around you is more pushes to feed yourself poison. So you're not being nourished. Your brain isn't being fed. Your cells aren't being fed. Now you're dealing with health issues. You're dealing with mental issues. You're dealing with stress. And then you're going to sit down and you're going to medicate and you're going to watch some television. And that television is going to continue the attack. Then you're going to go to sleep. You're not going to sleep well because you haven't been feeding yourself well. Then you're going to get up and you're going to do it all over again. That's a cold war. That's what we're in every single day. Just being Black in America, you're at war. And so as much as it feels good that you can go and have lunch with your white friends and that you can, all sit around the table and ain't nobody called you nigger to your face, like, we just need to be able to recognize what is happening on a day-to-day basis. So there are other systems, but I've been on for an hour and I had told everybody in my household that I was not going to be on for that long. So I'm going to cut it short. I was going to really get into some other systems, y'all, like contracts and subsidies that happen from the government, the disconnect in loans and funding. We could get into it, but I'll leave it right there. So I just want us to recognize, like, that's what we are. We are in a Cold War and we have to begin to wake up. And so on that note, please share out this message. And then also make sure that you subscribe, make sure that you share. I'm going to try and drop in here one more time to also go over to BBI's, go over to BBI's, not BBI, my bad, y'all. Go over to the BlackAgenda's page. So I'm like putting that on here right now, but go over to the BlackAgenda and subscribe there, because that network is going to be launched out here soon. And you're going to want to, be connected to that network, because if you've been paying attention to the BlackAgenda, we're talking about the 5 areas where we're systemically attacked. And inside of those areas where we're systemically attacked, we also want to talk solutions. So we have been working with people all over the country who can bring some of those solutions to the table. And that is going to be a key place where we're talking solutions. So make sure that you go over there. So all those Black fists, that's the BlackAgenda YouTube page, and you can go over there and subscribe. Again, make sure that if you want to connect with me, that you get on and check out my Patreon and Grind with Jice. Make sure that you follow me over there on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram more than Facebook. That's just kind of my personal thing. I don't have a Facebook business page. That's just me personally. But follow me over at Instagram. And I think that's it. Text BlackAgenda to 484848. Make sure you subscribe here. Make sure that you click that like button and make sure that you share. Yep, we're going to be in Brooklyn, August 24th. We're going to be in Brooklyn. All right, that reminds me, Denver. Thank you for that. Denver, Chicago, and Atlanta. We are coming to you very, very shortly. Denver in a couple of days, Chicago in a couple of weeks, Atlanta in just 1 month. It comes up quick. Y'all go over to the BlackAgendaOnTour.com. Get your tickets. All right, y'all. Check out my girl, Michi. She'll be on here shortly, and I will talk to y'all soon. Peace.